this is Amber from the Happy Caravan. I'm a mom of 10 kids and we live in New York City. The reason why we moved to New York City is because of all the classical music opportunities that the city affords, and we've moved to different cities. We moved to San Francisco, we also lived in San Diego, and every time it just seemed like there was a cap at what the kids could study in those cities, and so here we are in New York City. So that's why we're here. Anyway, last week I made a video about why we chose to homeschool our kids, and I stuck my foot in my mouth. I did not mean to. I said things in a way that people took the wrong way, and so I was like, I'm gonna offend people. I know I'm gonna offend people, and I'm like totally fine with that. I just don't want to offend people in a way where like they think I said something but I didn't mean it that way or whatever. Like I just want to keep it keep the offense to like how I really feel. So anyway, so we currently, I'll just tell you our current situation. Right now we have 2 kids in college. My oldest son is 20 and he goes to the Manhattan School of Music, which is right by Columbia University, just so you know, area wise. And then my daughter goes to the Juilliard School, which is in Lincoln Center, which is in the upper west side-ish area of Manhattan. So the schools aren't that far away, apart from each other, and both of them are music schools. And then below them are all the kids are in homeschool. So I have a baby, he's a year and a half, and he's like, you know, kind of like life schooling at this point. And then Melody, she's 4, and we're kind of doing like preschool stuff with her. She's super curious about everything, so you know, you can't put a cap on that. If she wants to know something, we're gonna tell it to her. And then there's Enoch, he's 6 and he's in 1st grade. And then there's Chloe, and she's in 3rd grade. And then Anna is in 5th grade. And then Noah is in 7th grade. Naomi is in 9th grade, and Elijah is in 11th grade. So that's kind of our grade range. And we're homeschooling basically Elijah on down, and that's kind of how we're doing things. Currently, the school we're using is an online school that's based in California. It is run by the state of California. And the reason we're able to do that is we're kind of like going back and forth from California to New York City, and like it's considered transit or something. I forget what they call it. So anyway, so we're able to do it because of that. I'm super grateful for that because New York State, as far as I know, does not have any charter homeschools that are like state funded. So now I've had a lot of moms, not a lot, a few moms tell me that I'm a sellout for using a state-run school and so forth, but I really appreciate the accountability. I mean, like the kids take tests, and like, you know, there's a teacher on it used to be that all the tests were in person, but after the pandemic, everything moved online, so that really obviously really worked out for us. But you know, the teacher's watching you, making sure like while you're taking the test, there's no cheating, no, I mean, so it's very much like a school experience without some of the, like, I'll talk about it later, but some of the negative school experiences. We use all public school textbooks for the most part. I do use Spectrum workbooks for the younger kids. You can find those on Amazon for dirt cheap. I still love Sing, Spell, Read, and Write for teaching literacy, early literacy. Unfortunately, it's out of print. I bought like the last workbook, and I'm just gonna like photocopy it or something. I hope that's not illegal, but it's out of print, so it's not like they can make money off it anyway. But for like $300, $400 from Abe Books, like, so if you can find something from Sing, Spell, Read, and Write, like, it's good. But there's also Explode the Code. There's some other early literacy things, and obviously just books, you know, those are really good teaching kids, you know, like Dr. Seuss, you know, that's kind of how I learned how to read, was just, you know, I wish I could, I would, you know, like all those you know, you put would, could, should, you know, in the sentence, you know, eventually you figure out that O-U-L-D, you know, says would, you know, like that's how I learned. But anyway, so that's kind of our process. Now in the older years, I like to purchase, since it is a charter public school, you're not allowed to use Christian materials anyway, but honestly, I don't know. I've seen some of the Christian materials, and I think they mean well, but I'm not sure if they really prepare you for the world that we live in. And maybe that's just because the world we live in is, you know, we've only lived in California and like New York City, you know, so, you know, the world we live in, you know, may not be what you know, middle America experiences. But at the same time, you know, I feel like California and New York City are kind of the, you know, maybe 15 years advanced of what's going to happen in Middle America. So I just feel like I don't feel like the public school books have anything to be like really scared of. Like I just, you know, I always, like for instance, obviously there's the two things that, you know, you're going to see in a public school book, you know, maybe that you wouldn't see in a Christian book is going to be something like evolution, or I don't know, you know, sometimes there's like horror stories in the literature section or something. Not like horror, but like, you know, Edgar Allan Poe or something, you know, something where it's kind of like, ew, that's kind of gross. But, you know, I don't see any, like, there's nothing really like, it's like, oh, that's super spooky. Like, I just feel like, you know, if a child is well-rounded, they have an understanding of the Bible and they have an understanding of, you know, what truth is, then anything that's kind of weird that shows up in a textbook, I don't think is going to be like, oh, I believe this so much now. Like, I don't think that's gonna like mess them up or whatever. But anyway, so we use all public school textbooks. Unfortunately, those are very, very hard to find. Like, public schools have access to them, but like the regular lay person does not. So I don't know how we get a hold of them or how these different companies get a hold of them, but we usually buy them used from Amazon. And sometimes they'll have like, you know, markings in them from the schools. And so one time we got a real, like, it's almost illegible. So we sent that one back. But for the most part, Amazon has been a good source of, you know, those big fat public school textbooks. And so I just want the kids to have a really well-rounded, you know, education. You know, I don't want them to only get these kind of Christianese versions of education, because I don't feel like that prepares you for like the real world we live in. So anyway, that's my homeschooling, where we are, and I mean, people will probably disagree with me, like when the lady that found out we were homeschooling with a charter school, she's like, she put her finger on my husband's face. She's like, she was kind of short, my husband's kind of tall. She's like, "You are a sellout," you know. So I know that there's differing opinions on that, but for us, that's worked, and it's helped our kids to be educated, and I feel like it's helped them to be educated in a way when, you know, the world shows up, you know. I mean, it's like in the New York City subway system, there's like ads for all sorts of crazy stuff, you know. And I just feel like them like not being completely sheltered from the way the world is, you know, starting with like the textbooks is helpful. Okay, so that's our homeschooling. And honestly, so our homeschooling day, a lot of it, we do music, you know, we're here for music, and we've been doing music for a long time. And for a long time, the kids would practice, you know, up to an hour, maybe hour and a half a day. But to really get good at music practice, you have to practice for about 3 hours a day. And so our kids practice for about 3 hours a day. They, you know, they'll wake up in the morning, and usually the big kids, they'll start with practice. And then in the afternoon, they'll do schoolwork. Sometimes it's lopsided for the little kids. Sometimes the little kids, like Enoch and Anna and Chloe. I mean, Anna and Chloe aren't so little, so they'll usually actually practice in the morning too. But like Melody and Enoch, you know, they'll oftentimes, you know, have a workbook out in the morning and then practice in the afternoon. In fact, they're practicing right now. I hear them. So our kids are pretty self-motivated. People think like, oh, you're making your kids do this, or you're making your kids do that. And it's like, they just did a little article about us in the New York Magazine. And I really like the picture that they took for it. So all these articles are always kind of like written like hit pieces, because no one wants to read an article like, you know, this fluffy cloud, happy family, look at how nice they are. Like, everyone wants there to be like some like scandal. So they always kind of like try and find the scandal and, you know, stick that in the beginning so you read the rest, which, okay, I'm fine with that. I'm gonna let that slide. But anyway, so, you know, one of the comments on the Instagram post that under the article was like, you know, there's no way that one of these kids doesn't want to, like, you know, be a professional sports player, this, that. And I'm like, I mean, I feel like the misnomer on that, I feel like there's a lack of understanding of that, because even the, you know, the sports people, like the really good sports people, their mama, dada, whoever was in their life, probably had them in, you know, soccer at 3. You know, like the same ages that my kids were studying music, they were probably going to a soccer league. You know, was that kid like, did they wait, you know, the second they were able to walk, they're like, I want to play soccer. You know, probably you'd see the kid kicking around a soccer ball and they're enjoying it, and you clap for them and they enjoy the clap. And, you know, there's probably some, you know, definitely some early signs that this kid really wants to play soccer. But you also had a soccer ball in your house. There was a lot of like surroundings that made that possible. I like this book called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I think that's his name. It's a really, really interesting book. I have no patience for reading, so I listened to it on like audiobook or whatever. But he was talking about how a lot of times your surroundings really do affect you, and who's responsible for those surroundings a lot of times it's parents, you know. So we've had music in our house. You know, the first person to learn music was me, you know. So I learned violin as an adult, and the kids just like, first Josiah saw it and he's like, I want to play violin. I wasn't even thinking about him playing violin. And then subsequently the rest, you know, basically our soccer ball around the house was a violin. And so all the kids are like, and regularly we've had conversations, like even family members have been like, oh, well, you know, this kid isn't winning as many competitions as one of your other kids. You know, maybe you should just quit with the kid that's not winning competitions. We've even had teachers tell us that. And you know, I'm not going to shelter my kids from that criticism. I'll be like, you know, so-and-so thinks you're not winning enough competitions to like continue. Do you want to continue? Is this something you want to do? Is this something you feel forced to do? And so we had this conversation, and resoundingly every time the kid's like, don't make me quit. Like, don't give up on me, Mom, you know? And so of course I'm like, okay, I won't give up on you anyway. So, you know, that's, you know, there's not the forcing that, you know, some of the, you know, comments will say there is. But so our situation, I went to school to be a public school teacher. I went to school, I got a degree in liberal studies, which a lot of people are like, what's that? Liberal studies basically means you study everything. So I studied music, and I studied art, and I studied, you know, math, and I studied a lot of a big array of subjects. The whole point is that so to be a grade school teacher, you know, they don't know if they're going to need someone that's really good at science or really good at math, or you know, the art teacher, or I even did PE, you know, like, so like I could have been a coach, you know. So they teach you a little bit of everything so that you're kind of a jack of all trades depending on what that school needs. And so that's what I studied. And so I in the midst of my studies, I went to this, I was in love with languages. I learned Spanish and French and Italian, and man, if I had stayed in school, I would have learned Japanese, Arabic, I wouldn't Portuguese, I would have been like down the line, I would have learned them all. But there's just only so many hours in the day and so many years in the lifespan, so, you know, I had to stop at those. But so part of the teaching degree is they want you to go to a public school and like co-teach under a teacher. Like, you're not getting paid or anything, it's just volunteer, and you kind of are like, it's like basically like a teacher's aide, and you kind of make a report about it, about your experience, you know. So that's what I did. And the school I chose to work in was a school called the Language Academy, and it was a grade school in it was like a charter grade school in San Diego that was language immersion. And there's a lot of language immersion schools. Some are French, some are Spanish, most are Spanish, but this one happened to be French and Spanish. And so I was really in love with the French language because my husband's family spoke French. They're from an island off the east coast of Africa named Mauritius, at least his dad's side, and they're associated with France as well. So there's like, you know, a lot of people that, you know, live in France but vacation in Mauritius, so back and forth. And his family too. I mean, they've lived in Mauritius, they've lived in France. They go to France, they go, you know, it gets like back and forth. So there's a lot of like back and forthness amongst the two areas. So anyway, so I was like all into French, and so, you know, I student taught at this French immersion school. And so, you know, I was really pro public school coming out of, you know, being a, you know, studying to be a public school teacher. So then I have Josiah, and after having Josiah, we start going to this really conservative church. And unfortunately, I've talked about it before, it's a church where some of the upper staff ended up going to jail, like like not in the one we were in, but in another one, because of inappropriate things they did with minors. Thankfully at our church, the pastor was really good, but they had this bad habit amongst the churches of, you know, somebody that falls in one of the churches, and they kind of shimmy them around like, okay, you made this mistake in this state, maybe you won't make the same mistake in this state. And I mean, obviously people that, I don't know, I mean, thankfully they ended up getting caught, and like, you know, different news organizations did stuff about it and so forth. So I think some of that's still going on. That's why we ended up just leaving. But like I said before, 99.9% of the people that went to that church, I think, were just really nice people that loved Jesus. There's just the random people that would come into town that were up to no good. And yeah, not gonna stick around for that one, so we left. But before we left, and before some of the weird things kind of came to town for us, like at the time when we first started going to this church, it was pretty nice. It was like there wasn't a lot of kind of like, what's going on? Like, it just wasn't like, seemed like a very nice place. And so there were a lot of homeschool families there, a lot of big homeschool families. And I just had Josiah, and you know, I was so touched by, you know, these kids that they looked you in the eye when you spoke. They, you know, didn't act like, well, you're not in my same grade, so I'm not going to talk to you. I mean, there was just a lot of, like, they're just surprisingly good manners and kindness, and you know, they would equally socialize with, you know, an 80-year-old person as they would with like a, you know, a newborn baby. There wasn't like a, you know, you're in my grade, so I'm going to talk to you. It was more like, you're a human, so let's have a relationship. Like that was, you know, something I noticed in the homeschool families, and I absolutely loved that. I also felt like there was, you know, a lot of the pressure that I felt in school. I didn't really sense that, particularly in the young ladies. I didn't feel like they felt like, I heard this actually in I'm gonna plagiarize it, but I'm gonna tell you who I got it from. So I was listening to an NPR podcast about hip hop, and they were talking about, like, in hip hop, a lot of times they were talking about some of the detractors of the genre, and that beauty, a woman's beauty, is found in the male gaze, you know, and that was something that I definitely felt, you know, very heavy when I went to public school, you know, and I just didn't sense that in these young ladies and in you know, these families, and it just there was like a kind of a freedom they had that I was like, I want that for my kids. So I was like, let's homeschool, you know. So, and like I said, I was a really big proponent of public school. And so Mark's family is a blended family. His older brother and him are from his dad's first marriage, and then his mom died of cancer when he was 5. And then his dad remarried, and they had, with his new wife, his dad had 2 more kids, a girl and a boy. And so at the time, so Mark and Phil, which are the older brothers, my husband and his older brother, they were public school the whole time. And then the younger brother and sister from the other marriage, they did homeschool, you know. And I remember talking to the dad, you know, Mark's dad, and I'd be like, well, you know, my dad says that kids should be missionaries in school because school's a dark place and they need more Christians there. And this is what Mark's dad told me. He's like, you know, you don't take a tree, a little baby sprig of a tree, and just stick it in the snow. You put it in a greenhouse, you put it in a nursery, you make sure the environment is not, you know, not too hot or too cold. You make sure it gets the right amount of water and the right amount of nutrients, and you just grow up that tree, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and then eventually, you know, when it becomes a, you know, solid enough of a trunk and the branches are robust and the root system is, you know, healthy, and it's not this baby tree anymore, then you can stick it outside. You can, you know, plant it in the spring. It'll make it just fine through the snow because it has, you know, enough depth and girth as a tree to survive in the snow, you know. And, you know, I kind of listened to that, and I definitely filed that in the back of my mind, but, you know, it was like, I was still like, you know, public school all the way. So fast forward to when I have a kid. And it's really weird when you have a kid because it's like you have one mindset. I mean, maybe not you, but me. I had one mindset before I had a kid, and after I had that kid, like, my world changed. I was like, I just wanted everything to be okay for this kid. And I know you can't shelter kids from everything, but when you're a brand new mama and you've got this helpless little baby, I don't know if it's hormones or what, all you want to do is keep that baby safe, you know? So anyway, so I'm coming out of my, like, public school all the way, have this baby, I'm going to this church that's like, there's these big homeschool families and they're so beautiful, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna homeschool, you know. And so Josiah's coming up to that 5-year mark, and for some reason, it was the weirdest thing. So I was actually with my mom, I was trying on skirts in the in a dressing room at like Macy's or something. And one of the skirts I tried on was like a plaid skirt. And this was like, you know, maybe August of the year that he had turned 5. And, you know, I just felt like the plaid skirt for some reason reminded me of like when I went to kindergarten and I was wearing this little plaid skirt and I was ready for school and I was so happy, and you know, and I really did enjoy public school as a kid, particularly as a younger kid, and then later on I liked it for the peer group, not so much for learning, but you know, I really enjoyed it. And so I just felt like, oh my goodness, I'm holding my kid back from something that, like this joy that was in part of my life, I'm holding them back from this joy, you know. And so we started homeschooling for like 1 week when he was 5, and I just, you know, I had only known public school, and it just felt so weird to me. I was like, what am I doing? So I was driving by one day with the language academy, and I was like, I wonder if they have room. So I go in there, and sure enough they have room, and I signed him up to go to school. Like basically, this is probably a Friday. On Monday he was in school, and so he's you know, he does pretty well, I mean, at first. And you know, I'm thinking like, maybe this will work out, you know. And I was so in love with the culture of the school, but you know, the parents were super involved, and it just seemed like kind of a dream come true. And then what happened was, there was a boy. Now this was controversial in my first video, and I'm just gonna be careful how I say it. So there's a boy who was going through a hard time. Now, that people are sort of like, oh, well, you think that somehow because a kid's, you know, family's going through divorce, that your kid's too good to hang out with them. That's not what I'm saying at all. So the only reason I knew that his parents were going through divorce was because things were kind of happening that were weird with this kid and my son. And originally my first video I called it, you know, a friendship, but it was kind of also a little bit of bullying / sexual harassment going on, which is weird because this is kindergarten. But you know, this boy would expose himself to my son. I think it was just his behind, but it was just, you know, like basically I looked it up, like exposing yourself when someone doesn't want you to or doesn't ask for it is a form of sexual harassment. Yes, it's a 5-year-old to another 5-year-old, but still that's like an inappropriate thing, and this is just kindergarten. So that happened, I don't know how many times, and this boy would talk about naked parties and just weird stuff, you know, that was just a little bit like, that's kind of not kindergarten-y sounding to me, you know. And then in addition to that, like it was a friendship, but it was also kind of bullying because, you know, I looked this up too to make sure I'm using the right term, but kind of forcing someone to do, or like pushing someone to do something they're not comfortable with a kind of a threat attached to it. That was kind of what was going on. So like, you know, he would like tell Josiah to like, you know, touch somebody else's door, like the boy would do it, and then Josiah would follow, and Josiah kind of felt, I think, compelled to do what this kid wanted him to do, or copy this kid, for this kid to be his friend. And I guess the threat was the, you know, loss of friendship or whatever. So, you know, I mean, it was friend-ish, you know, on some levels, but there's also this kind of harassment / bullying element. And, you know, I went to the school administrator, and the school administrator is like, okay, well, his, you know, parents are going through a hard time, and that's probably why he didn't know what to do. So I did ask if he could be moved to another kindergarten class, and the school administrator was like, no, there's no more room, so, you know, you're gonna have to deal with it. So it was a really awkward situation, and I was kind of left with, here's the other thing, was that it wasn't just that there were these weird things happening at school. Thankfully I was finding out about them because, you know, he was getting like my son was getting red cards, and like, you know, the like, you're being a bad kid, you know, things from the teacher. But also at home, you know, he was acting very strangely. He was friends with, at the time when he went to kindergarten, I had 2 more kids. I had Elijah, who was about 1.5 years, and I had, Pearl, who was she was probably 4, yeah, she was 4 at the time. And before he went to school, he was really good friends with Pearl and Elijah. But then after going to school and, you know, kind of having this weird relationship with this kid at school, he was too good to be friends with the kids, you know, at home. So it was just, I started to feel really uncomfortable, and this was like 2 months in. to this situation, and things are getting worse, and people are noticing that his behavior is seriously deteriorating. They're not telling me about it, but after I took him out, these various people like my mom, and like we had a bus ministry, and there were some kids, and they went to public school too, but they were like, we didn't want to tell you, but yeah, Josiah he was turning into a really bad kid really quickly, you know, so, and you know, they have no bias, they're just observing it, right? So I was driving home. I was actually going to the doctor's office for, I think my son was having an ear infection or checkup or something. My youngest son, my son Elijah, he was 18 months old. And so I drove into the parking garage, and I scraped my car. And I don't know why, but when I scraped my car, it was like not a huge, it wasn't like crunch, it was just like, you know, my husband was able to kind of buff it out a little bit, but for some reason scraping my car, it just made me feel like, I have to take my kid out of there. I was not sleeping well, I was under a lot of anxiety, and I was trying to shut out the fact that it was the school situation that was making me so anxious, but I couldn't shut it out. When my car scraped, I was like the lights turned on. I was like, you are miserable because your kid is in that school, like, just going downhill. Like, you need to get him out. And it was really hard for me because I really wanted him to learn French, like a fluent speaker, like, you know, from a young age. And I loved the culture of the school. Like, I remember going to like the, you know, like where, like, I forget, book club or whatever it is, like where you buy books and it supports the school. Like, I just loved that, you know, that all the books were in French, and I was like, oh, you know, I just felt like, you know, school dream come true. But it may be that God allowed Josiah to have this strange relationship with this kid that was just kind of sucking him down, to just point me in the direction of homeschooling. And some of the comments in my original video were like, oh, well, you should teach your kid to have grace. You should, you know, teach your kid to be a leader. Like, if somebody's like, oh, I taught my daughter to be a leader, you know. And I tried every morning, you know, on the way to school. I'd quote this Bible verse, you know, do that which is right and good. And, you know, there's kids trying to get you to do bad things. You know, don't, you know, maybe, you know, don't follow him so closely and hang out with him so much. But, you know, but my son was just really drawn to this kid's personality. And I think this kid saw Josiah's personality as the sort of person he could, you know, reel in. I'm not saying there's anything malicious about it at all. I'm just saying like, you know, it's like Batman and Robin. Like, sometimes there's just like a chemistry there, which, you know, in the case of Batman and Robin is good. But in the case of, you know, a kid that's struggling with things, and, you know, really doing things that are inappropriate, and it looks kind of cute when it's at 5, but, you know, later on it's like the sort of thing that, you know, gets you in jail or whatever, you know. So it's like, it was not a good situation for Josiah, and I would have loved for him. See, I feel like what people want Josiah to have done at 5 years old is they say, you know, I don't appreciate it when you pull down your pants. I didn't ask for that. You know, I'm gonna have to talk to the principal if you keep doing that. You know, I feel like there's like, it's almost like this, you know, 28-year-old response. Like, a 5-year-old doesn't know how to do that. I feel like it's unfair for us to send kids to the public school system, and this is not, and this is why those comments, like, I'm not bothered at all by that, because for a long time, until my dad actually taught in public school, he was the same way. But he didn't say, like, you know, teach your kid to be, you know, a leader or whatever. He would say teach your kid to be a missionary. And so for the longest time, you know, my dad was like, well, you know, you're really missing out on an opportunity for a kid to be a missionary in the public school system by not sending your kid to the public school. And I just feel like it's unfair to send a kid to the public school system to be a missionary, or, you know, in a secular sense, a leader, by themselves, you know, and really they are by themselves. You know, I know there's supposed to be administrators and teachers that are watching over them, but, you know, people look at me with 10 kids and are like, how can you possibly watch over those 10 kids? Well, honestly, when we're doing homeschool, there's like 3 or 4 in the room at the most. You know, I get babies sleeping, you know, the big kids are doing music practice, you know, it's a piece of cake compared to, you know, you've got 30 kids in a classroom, and, you know, there's kids with all sorts of problems. not a parent breaking up is not the only problem there is. There's a lot of trauma, and I believe there is, well, statistically there is more trauma. That's just scientifically. There's more trauma that kids are going through nowadays than they were, 70, 80 years ago. So, like my husband, his mom died when he was 5, and he didn't, pull down his pants and knock on doors and this and that and all the stuff that this one boy did when he was going through trauma. My husband went into himself. He was just a recluse, and he felt like he couldn't cry because he felt like if he cried, then the other people around him that were crying, like he felt like he, as a 5-year-old boy, needed to be strong for all the people that were mourning the loss of his mother. And that's he understands now that that was not the right response, or a response that anyone was really expecting him to show. But that was his response, and so maybe a teacher has that going on in the classroom. That that's 2 out of 30. Our family, when we were like bordering on homelessness, living in a trailer, if our kids were in public school, they probably wouldn't have been, like top-notch school performers at that point. I mean, that's the home insecurity, food insecurity. Nowadays, there's, inflation has hit, and like we've found ways to make more beans and less meat and this and that. But, there's some families that they may not have the emotional bandwidth to make, lots of meals at home and this and that. And so the kids end up just going hungry. Like there's so much going on now that it was going on at some point in to some level at 1950, but statistically it's happening more now. And so you've got a room of 30 kids, maybe only 10 of them are going through some trauma, and they're all exhibiting that the trauma they're going through in different ways. But that's a lot. That's a lot that's a lot to put on that teacher. And one of my relatives, she actually went into the teaching profession, and she kind of had like a mental breakdown. And it wasn't like the school administrators, when that happened, were like, oh, well, I guess you're fired because you don't have what it takes. No, the school administrators are like, oh yeah, everybody goes through that. Every teacher goes through that. So you'll get through it, And she ended up getting through it, But I mean, it is not easy. It is not easy to have a teacher go through that. And I don't feel like it's fair for you to send your kid there expecting the teacher to save the day, because they don't have the bandwidth. There's too much to save the day from. And they're paid to teach, but they end up being, like psychological help. I mean, they have so many hats they're wearing, and there's only so much that they can give. And so, anyway, so let's fast forward, 19 years. So my son Josiah, right, like I said, we were fighting homelessness in the Bay Area, and one of the things that was making our neighbors, complain about us to the point that we may not have had a house to live in if we weren't very careful, was our children practicing music. And so what we did instead was we had the kids practice in Golden Gate Park. Now the younger ones, my husband was always near them, because Golden Gate Park, it's got a lot of nice people. Then there's other people that may not have good thoughts towards your kids necessarily. So the older ones, like particularly Josiah, he's 19, he's an adult. So he's practicing in a tunnel at Golden Gate Park. He's trying to protect his expensive instrument and so forth. So there's like this underground tunnel, and I don't know why it's there. It's probably for some sort of aqueduct or something, if there's rain, water, whatever. And he's practicing, and then come in a couple of homeless guys. And one of them has a guitar, and they're talking about music and so forth. And I don't know if they offered him like a joint or cigarette or whatever, but at that point, he's 19 years old, he's a big fat tree trunk, and he's like, no, that's all right, thanks guys, and he talks to them, and he has a little bit of a, friendship with them from time to time when they come through in the park. But once again, he's a big tree trunk. There was a huge difference in maturity between Josiah at 5 and Josiah at 19. And, I just, I really wanted him to, be that leader and so forth, but he just did not have the ability to do that. So the thing is like, the other thing was like, well, we don't have the option homeschool, and you're just saying like homeschool is the only way and this and that. And I understand that. A lot of people don't have the option to homeschool. I went to public school my whole life, and my husband went to public school his whole life. And I'll tell you our experience. Our experiences, I mean, he'll hope he could tell you his experience better, but, you know, basically up to the grade school years, you know, things went pretty well. You know, there's some awkwardness. I remember on the school bus, you know, some kid brought a, you know, dirty magazine, and I was like, oh, you know, I don't think I told my parents about that. That's the other thing. A lot of things happen at school that your kids don't talk to you about. And that's okay, you know, but at the same time, some of it's stuff, you know, if it's sexually explicit content, or if it's, you know, somebody bullying them, or these things that kids just kind of stuff, you know, they just kind of stuff, and they're like, you know, your kid comes home and they're like, how was school? And they're like, fine. Because it's almost like to have to rehash whatever trauma happened to you that day. Like, some girl punched me in the stomach in the bathroom in North Chicago. I think because I was, like, her friends didn't want her to hang out with me. Like, she was kind of my best friend, and she was a different race than I was, and I think, like, her friends didn't like that she was hanging out with me, and so she had to, like, prove to them that, like, she wasn't my friend, and so obviously the punch in the bathroom was the thing that did the trick. I don't know if I told my mom about that. Like, it's because it's like when you're going through something that's, like, kind of traumatic, like the dirty magazine or the punch in the bathroom or some of the other things that happened in school, particularly in grade school, and your parents are like, how was school today? It almost like, it's like you have to relive what happened. And what happened was traumatic, and you don't want to relive it. You just want, like, that, okay, that hopefully she's not going to punch me in the stomach tomorrow, you know, hopefully I'm not going to be too close to the kid with the dirty magazine, like, you know, like on the bus, you know, like, it just, you know, you don't want to relive that, you know, like, even people that are abused inappropriately, you know, a family member of mine was abused inappropriately, and it didn't come out until, like, the late teen years when it happened. And, you know, she's a bigger, you know, loudmouth than I am, you know, and so, you know, and I'm a big loudmouth, and I didn't say anything, you know, when these various things happened, and it just, it's like you don't want to say anything because you don't want to deal with it anymore. It's like you just want it to go away, and talking about it makes it feel like it's there. So anyway, you know, that's the other aspect. So anyway, so I went to, my husband and I both, grade school, public school, and then I really liked grade school because I was an only child. I really liked the atmosphere, and then I also really liked it in high school, but for all different reasons. I turned very, very boy crazy, like basically middle school. And, you know, that was why I ate, slept, and breathed that. And that's a very distracting learning environment. You know, a lot of times there was I forget what it's called. It was some Boys Adrift. It was this kind of controversial book that came out in like 2010, 11, something like that. And it was kind of advocating like schools being segregated, you know, like boys being in one school, girls being in another, because particularly in the teen years, it is super distracting to have like this basically sexual tension going on. And like I said earlier, you know, the other thing that really weighs on you, particularly as a female, I can't say this from a male perspective, but that beauty is in the male gaze, you know, that your worth is defined socially by what the young men around you feel about you. And I've heard this, like, you know, after the fact that this boy that was my friend in high school said they'd sit on a bench and they basically rate girls, and they'd be like, you know, this girl's valuable because of this girl looks good because of that, this girl doesn't look good because of that, you know, and they talk about, you know, are they virgins or not, like just all this stuff. And it's like, you're just walking to class, you know, and it's like, you know, that's kind of icky. Like, it's just, like, this, it just goes beyond like religion. It's just distracting. And I see, not, you know, since we've homeschooled our kids, I've seen our girls just have a freedom about them, you know, to do recipes and to do, there's just so much freedom there. They sew, and they, you know, they're not picking out outfits based on like how many boys' eyes they can turn, you know, they're picking out outfits because they like the dress, you know, I guess, or they like the, you know, we don't only wear skirts anymore. That was a thing that we used to do because of that church, but we don't do that anymore. So anyway, they pick out clothes because of how the clothes make them feel, not how many, you know, heads are going to turn when they walk by. And that's how I picked out clothes. You know, I was like who's gonna like me in this, you know? And it's like, not a healthy place to be. So anyway, it's just high school for us. And here's the other thing too, is one of the comments was like, well, you know, I've taught my daughter to be a leader, and she got really good raises and that. So my parents taught me to be a leader, they thought, you know, and I got really good grades. I got almost all straight A's, and then I went to college and got even more straight A's, you know, there. My husband's similar. I don't think he got as many A's as I did in high school, but he did go on to Oregon State University, you know, but he ended up dropping out of there, but ended up going to a graphic design school, you know. So both of us on the outside, both graduated from college. We look like success stories. We look like, well, that went well, didn't it? And I think God did work it out. Everything, it did end up working out. But in the midst of, you know, I went to a school, I mean, I think my mom wanted me to go to this school because it's where the rich kids went, you know. And so there's like in Alameda, the upper part of Alameda, this is an island in the Bay Area, was full of like, you know, military kids. There used to be a military base, and like project kids, and like kind of this is the cheap area of the island. The lower part was like, you know, where the rich people lived, you know. And so I went to the school where the rich people lived, and one of the issues with that was that I was just, you know, kind of a Navy brat without a ton of money myself. I mean, kids were like getting dropped off in Rolls Royces and stuff. No Rolls Royce for me, you know, and that's fine. I never really wanted to be like, you know, kid in a Rolls Royce, but there's that pressure. And so I found myself kind of attracted to kids on the like subcultures, like marginalized subcultures. So like the punk rock kids or the skater kids, or, you know, that's still where I'm at today. I'm always like, you know, obviously I don't my kids are the skater kids now, but you know, I'm always attracted to a more kind of like subculture, counterculture type, you know, style. And I think a lot of that has to do with me just trying to find my way amongst the wealthy kids, but not being a wealthy kid. So you befriend a group that you kind of align with, you know, which is the non-wealthy kids, you know. And, you know, they were dealing with more stuff in their lives than a lot of times the wealthy kids were, you know. Almost all of my friends in high school were, you know, their families were broken up, you know. There was just a lot of, you know, one of my friends, my best friend, you know, his dad lived in kind of like a halfway house trailer thing, and I would go by and I'd hang out with him, and we'd go to school, and you know, those were my friends. And the thing is that if I had hung out with the wealthy kids more, which didn't really accept me because I wasn't one of them, same thing, you know, just with more dollar bills on it, you know. So anyway, so that was an added struggle, was I just was like, I was an outsider, you know. So but I found other outsiders to hang out with, you know. So you know, that was my growing up. But so I got pretty good grades and everything was looking really good on the outside. But, you know, I would sneak off to parties because I didn't want to be like the oddball out, you know. I would, you know, there would be sexual experimentation, particularly at those parties. And then also, you know, drug use, marijuana, not heroin. Same thing with my husband. Same, you know, 3 things. Drinking, you know, underage drinking. But not like, you know, in France where you like have a glass of wine with your family. But like drinking with the intention to get drunk and like, you know, be a party girl like that. That was, you know, part of my high school. And, you know, a lot of people, I think in the secular world, look at that and be like, well, that's a rite of passage, so congratulations for you. But, you know, from a Christian worldview, that's considered sin, you know. And I think as Christians, you know, if we say that, you know, we're like the bad guy. But like, we live in Harlem. There's a bunch of Muslim schools around here, and they probably say that, you know, drinking, doing drugs, and sexual experimentation before marriage is all bad. Like and that's okay because they're, you know, it's like, well, that's culture. Or like over in Brooklyn, we've got the Orthodox Jews, and they're like, you know, the rules are you don't even touch a woman before you're married if she's not your, you know, close blood relation. Like, so, you know, that's okay because like, well, that's their culture. But like with Christians, it's like, well, no, you're just a closed-minded, yucky person. And it's like, well, okay. But I mean, religion aside, that's a very distracting environment to be in. I mean, if you are cutting class to go smoke pot across the street and then you come back to class, you are not going to be as good in your studies. I mean, there's like, it's not like, that's not a Christian thing. That's just like a like scientific, like looking at what the brain does when it's under the influence of stuff. It's just not as, absorbative of the information. I mean, the other thing too is that there, people are like, oh, well, somebody put a Harvard article in the comments and they're like, well, in a homeschool setting, there's a lot of possibility of things like abuse that nobody finds out about. And I will give you that, like a kid, that's going to public school every day, if they're being physically abused, if they're not getting fed enough food, if, those are things that show up physically, and the school administrators will be like, oh wait, what's going on with this kid, which that's how it's supposed to work. But my experience with the school, with a teacher that's overworked and administrators that are overworked, they may or may not notice, but there's at least the possibility of them noticing. There's a stopgap there. But, like for instance, like with the Turpin family, where it's like, the kids were not getting fed enough and so forth. I mean, that's a bad story, and I can't defend that. Obviously, that's like, you don't do that as a parent. But at the same time, there's a reason why, every news outlet covered that, because that's weird. Like, how did that even happen? Like mentally, how does a parent do that? The other situation that people bring up would be the Duggar family. And the Duggar family, yes, I bought all their VHS tapes or whatever, the DVDs or whatever. I really enjoyed watching them, and there was a lot of the sweet homeschool stuff that I had come to love, that they exhibited. But they were following this very strange teaching, the Gothard teaching, and I had a friend that was involved in that, and it's a very strange teaching. So it's like it almost, basically not saying anything is somehow looked upon as spiritual, like good for you for taking one for the team, almost like what was going on in the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church that I was involved in, where if there's some sort of abuse, like, well, just be thankful that you have the ability to show grace to somebody, when it's like, no, make sure you tell on, really the response should be, make sure you tell on them so that person goes to jail. Like, that needs to be the response. Once again, I'm not an advocate of his teachings, but Michael and Debbie Pearl, I think maybe just Debbie Pearl, she came out with a book called Yell and Tell. And I love this book. We've purchased it a number of times because it's basically a book written for children, where it's like, someone does something inappropriate to you, and it kind of like uses childish language to try and explain from like maybe a child's point of view, what an adult groomer / predator would be trying to do to a kid. And they're like, you yell and you tell. If they say don't tell, or somebody's going to get hurt or this, that, you yell, you tell. So the books are called Sarah Sue Learns to Yell and Tell, and Sammy Learns to Yell and Tell. And we have those books, and I have not seen another book that has been more just effective when trying to explain to a childhood sexual abuse, like, this is not okay. You yell, you tell. And so, regardless of what their other teachings are saying, I do appreciate those books. So that's something that I think is a very valuable tool, regardless of your religion. And I don't think there's any like religious stuff in there at all. Regardless of your religion, regardless of, if your kids are homeschooled, if your kids are public school, like our kids go to music lessons and stuff, and the door closes, and we're like, if anything goes on, you yell and you tell. Like I'm just like, they can look like a nice person, but just because they look nice doesn't mean they are, right? So that was the whole, and it's not just the Duggar family, the Institute for Basic Life Principles under the Gothard Institute, which is the overarching kind of umbrella that the Duggars were under. It encouraged not yelling and telling. It encouraged being quiet about it. And I understand it's good to, certain things don't need to be aired, but certain things do need to be aired, because it's like a weed, If you don't, you plant this garden and like there's weed growing. If you don't uproot that weed just right at the very beginning, it's gonna grow big and fat, and it's gonna grow this fat, and your little plant's like, trying to live next to it, you know, kills it. So yeah, I mean, that's not the sort of thing, like, we need to yell and we need to tell. So that's something that you can do, you know, as a homeschooler, to try and keep anything like that from happening. The other thing they said was that, well, your kids are not going to be exposed to other, you know, views, and, you know, they're just going to keep sheltered in their little, like, thought bubble. And I understand that. Like I said, we use public school textbooks. And they said there's no oversight from the state. Like in other countries, if they're homeschooling, there's oversight from the state. There is some oversight from the state. Maybe not, you know, enough, but at the same time, I feel like trying to legislate things just ends up getting really messy. I feel like what should happen if, you know, this person in the article, you know, if they really feel like homeschool is a problem because there's not the correct oversight, why don't these, like, the 50 states in the Union of United States of America, like, what if they made homeschool, the charter homeschools, the charter public homeschools that do have a teacher overseeing things, that do, you know, check up on your grades like our kids have, that do check up, that do tests, that do have you send in work samples of what you're doing. That, you know, if you're not far enough in your math program, we use Alex Math, which is an online math program. They're like, you know, you're not far enough to get through this by the end of the year. I'm not going to just, you know, give you an A for nothing. You need to actually, you know, like, that sort of oversight. I think that's a potentially good oversight. Like, kids kind of need that. But legislating it, I think, could get weird. I feel like, why don't the states come up with attractive charter homeschools that give elective funds? That's what the one in California does. Now, unfortunately, what's happened is, so during the pandemic, public schools, like public sit-down brick and mortar schools, were losing members really quickly because, you know, public schools were not used to the whole online learning thing. That was not something that they were set up for. And so there's kind of this mass exodus out of the public schools to these, like, charter homeschools, which already had this whole system set up of, you can learn from home, you know, we're going to give you money for lessons, or, you know, so the public schools, brick and mortar in California, went to, they lobbied, I don't know if it was Mr. Newsom or somebody, and they got a law passed so that these public charter homeschools, you know, it just really tried to, like, choke them, you know, so that you couldn't get new members, like new kids couldn't come in, like it had to be a quota, like you can only have this many students, and then they also, like, kind of, like, really made it difficult to get the electives funding. Now we're not even hardly able to use our electives funding because there's just so many, you know, you have to have this test, and you have to have this piece of paper, and you have to have this okay, and you have to have this clearance, and like, you have to have a website, and you have to, you know, be on this website. And it's like, there's so many things where in the olden days of the public charter homeschool, for your elective funds, you know, your teachers, like, would have to pass, obviously, some sort of background screening to make sure that they weren't, you know, a child molester or whatever. And then also they had to, like, you know, show that the state's money was being used appropriately for violin lessons or something, you know, that was going to help them in their education. So, you know, I say cut the red tape. I say, you know, the pandemic's over. Brick and mortar schools offer that in-person learning experience if parents want that. But then offer a public charter homeschool with the oversight, and just make it attractive enough where, you know, homeschoolers decide, you know, hey, that's good. Now, there will always be the people that are like, oh, you're a sellout and this and that. But there's a lot of, almost every homeschool mom I knew in our Suzuki violin group in San Diego had joined a public charter homeschool. Almost all of them, you know, because there was the funding for the music lessons and so forth. So, you know, I think that's, if people are really serious about there being oversight is possible. State oversight is possible. The other thing too is, you know, let's say, like my friend was, I feel like she's my best friend in San Diego. Her family used the Institute for Basic Life Principles. It's like a curriculum, you know, and so, I don't know, a lot of times they'd use verses out of context. It was just weird. Weird stuff. I'm sure there were some good things, but there was a lot of weird stuff too. And my friend's younger brother really felt cheated in his education. You know, like his mom's like, okay, plant a pumpkin, you know, and he's like, that was his senior science, you know, he planted a pumpkin, and he just felt really cheated by that. And I understand, you know, but here's the thing about America. unlike, like, for instance, in South Korea, it's like the birth rate is plummeting. Like, I guess there's going to be like almost 30% less people in South Korea because this plummeting birth rate in like 2090 or whatever. Because nobody can afford to have a kid, because you can't stick your kid in public school in South Korea, because no, they need to get ahead. Like, they need to be in the up school. Like, it's just like if you don't, like, it's just such a grind. Kids go from the morning up until like late at night, sometimes 11 at night, you know. There's like school, and then there's tutoring, and because there's only so many jobs at these corporate job firms in South Korea, and if you don't get one of those, then you're going to be, you know, a garbage collector. Like, there's no second chance there. Same with Japan. Another reason why the birth rates plummeting there too, because there's so many demands on, if you do not graduate like top of your class from high school and then college, and you're not immediately sucked into the workforce like the year you graduate, it's over for you. And there's like these whole, like, they do like these, like, you know, documentaries about it, about these Japanese people that just, you know, they missed the hiring boat, you know, if it was a bad economy or whatever, they missed the hiring boat, and now they're just kind of like floating, and they can't get married because they can't get a job, and they can't. So, I mean, that is a very dismal sounding situation. But America, that is not America. Okay, America is a situation where, you know, like my friend's brother, he didn't graduate with the best education, but, you know, he worked it. He wanted to get married. He did pizza route, UPS. He just worked his way up. He ended up purchasing a condo for him and his wife, and then like, somehow he was able to purchase another home, but he still kept the condo as a rental income. And so, I mean, have that go out throughout the years. He's probably a millionaire by now with a pumpkin in the backyard education, you know. Another story is the Michael Pearl story, which, I mean, obviously I don't agree with everything he says, but I do like his homeschool stories. And there was a Amish boy that was, like, you know, basically had a third grade education, because the Amish don't necessarily, you know, teach the upper levels of learning, because it's like, well, we milk, you know, cows, and we build houses, and like, that's what you need to live around here, so that's what you're gonna learn. And they learn to read and write, but there's not a lot of, like, higher learning. And so, you know, this third grade education Amish boy, he wanted to go to college, and Michael's like, I don't know. You don't know what it's like, it's gonna be difficult. So, but he's like, no, I want to go to college. So this Amish boy went to college, and the first semester Michael said he got C's, and he was like, okay, you know. And the second semester he got B's, and then third semester he got A's. And so it's like the work ethic he learned is, you know, milking the cows or whatever he did, you know, on the farm, plus the, you know, the minimal education he received, that gave him the foundation to be able to just move up the ladder, you know. Who knows, maybe he's a doctor by now. But the other thing too is, you know, America is just such a land of second chances, and I know there's not the opportunity everywhere, but, you know, it's like, you know, you can not graduate at all. Like, you don't have to graduate from high school, and you can, you know, be like Casey Neistat, and he ended up getting some, like, honorary, you know, degree at one of these Ivy League colleges, I forget which one, or you know, Steve Jobs and Microsoft, Bill Gates, you know, like, these guys didn't even finish college, but they were open-minded enough to create something really cool in the garage, you know. And Seth Godin, he's kind of an intellectual. I like his stuff, you know. So he says that, you know, the education system was built to create, you know, cogs in the system, in a system that no longer needs cogs. So basically he was saying, like, the Industrial Revolution really required some level of education, and so, you know, they wanted all kids to have a certain amount of education so that they could, you know, basically be good factory workers. And Seth Godin's like, you know, we don't need as many factory workers. Obviously, there's, like, you know, there's robots, there's overseas labor, there's a bunch of things that make that factory work not as profitable anymore. And so basically, you know, Seth Godin, he's not obviously a Christian or anything. His idea is that, you know, we need to teach kids how to think, not what to think. And that's, you know, I would say Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are kind of the how to think, not what to think kind of poster children. because their minds were open enough to be able to create something really cool. And that's something I want for our kids, you know? I mean, like Josiah amazes me. Like, he's working on a Portuguese citizenship application. My granny is Portuguese, and so, well, she's half Portuguese. So her dad was born in Portugal. He's a Portuguese citizen, and so Portugal is one of the easier EU countries to be a citizen in, and so he's trying to like translate this basically baptismal document that because that was kind of the birth certificate in old, you know, Portugal. So he's translating it into Portuguese, and he's like, well, Mom, you know, he's translating the old Portuguese to something more legible that he can write, you know, to give to the consulate to see if we can get the citizenship for my granny, and then it would be for my mom, and then we'd have to do it for me, and then, you know, all the kids would have EU citizenship, which would be pretty cool. Like, you know, to just be able to be a citizen, you know, like, that'd be super cool. So obviously there's a lot of music, classical music in Europe, right? So he's like, well, you know, when I'm doing this, it's kind of like when I'm, you know, translating or transcribing something from Latin. And I'm like, okay, he's never learned Latin. He's never learned Portuguese. He has learned some French, not as much as I'd like him to have, but I mean, his mind is not capped. His mind is not, you know, it hasn't been like, you know, steam pressed into this little like nugget of a, no, I mean, his mind is like, oh, okay, that's Portuguese. I don't speak Portuguese. I'm going to use these resources to help understand what this document says. Like, I just feel like there's an open-mindedness. You know, Pearl has, you know, she creates patterns for costumes that, like, without a pattern. Like, she just dreams it up. You know, Naomi, she sits there and she'll listen to a film score and she will transcribe that film score. She has no notes in front of her. She is creating the notes on paper just from what she hears. Like, you know, Elijah, his ability to just, I mean, he just comes up, like, we're close to 100,000 subscribers, you know, which is really exciting. But if we get that silver play button, it's going in Elijah's room, because so many of the ideas for what we do for, social media wise, he's kind of like the brainchild of it. So that's going in his room. That's his, he did that. You know, on down, I mean, Noah, just his ability to like, so my husband was friends with this guy named Scott Pingle, who's the principal bassist in the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, and he's also Noah's bass teacher. Scott Pingle was really good friends with this guy who is basically, I don't know if he was the CEO of Tesla. He was one of the big guys in Tesla. Obviously not Elon Musk, but, you know, one of the people surrounding Elon. And so Noah went out to breakfast with Scott and this guy that worked at Tesla. And so Noah is immediately inspired about all things Tesla. And so he is able to create a Tesla out of Legos, no pattern. He's just creating a Tesla, you know, out of Legos. Like, so I mean, and I can go down. I mean, like Anna, our entire van is filled with artwork by Anna. You know, just the different composers and I mean, it is amazing. Chloe, I mean, her ability, I mean, her kindness and her sweetness and just, she has like, she kind of also has a really artistic ability. There's no cap to her artistry. She's just really creative. Super kind, super giving, super loving. You know, Enoch, Melody, even Moses. Like, I just see so much, like, no one's told them they can't, you know? And when people tell you, and if people do say you can't, I'm all over that. Like for instance, Naomi's first film score that she transcribed was Jurassic Park. And some of the kids had some, you know, kind of heavy critiques, like, well, you know, this part is kind of lame. Oh, that's not what it sounds like in the movie, you know? And I was like, you know what? Then you go make your own. You're not going to talk smack about her arrangement. You make your own arrangement. And since then, they've kind of kept their mouth shut, and I'm like, you are allowed to give criticism, but it's got to be constructive criticism. You're going to say, you know what, instead of this note, what do you think about doing this note? It's going to be respectful, constructive criticism. And because I'm able to kind of like be in this environment and see exactly what's going on, when I see that you know, you can't, because it almost shut her down. She was almost like, oh, I'm never going to arrange anything again. Like, she was done. I was like, no. You're not allowed to quit like that, and these kids are going to shut up if they don't have something nice to say. Now, you can say something, and I'm not saying, like, you can't, obviously, you can't live in a bubble, like, where everyone's just like, yes, man, like, oh, you're so good. Like, no, we need to be critical, but critical with an air of respect, which there's just not enough oversight, like in a, I feel like in a public school environment where, you know, there's not going to be that, you know, somebody's smashing somebody's idea down, and like the teacher may not catch that. And that may be the end of that for that kid. I mean, kids are so fragile. One incident of somebody smashing them down and some overseer not being like, no, 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 you're not going to smash that person down like that. Like, that can be the end of some dream that that kid has. And so, anyway, I mean, I know we can't, like, you know, be helicopter parents all the time and this and that, but I do feel like God made us big and fat and muscly as adults with strength, you know, and then he gives us this itty bitty little helpless, like if you don't hold their neck right, it's gonna break. Like, that's how delicate this little human is. Like Moses, when he was born, he didn't eat very well. He was 9 pounds 8 ounces, and he was just a fatty one, you know, and he was just like, he did not nurse well because I think he just had all this extra body fat, and it didn't, like a lot of my other kids, like they were so hungry because they were, you know, 7 pounds 6 pounds 11 ounces. No, this kid, when Moses was born, he was a big boy, and so he didn't, I think, sense the like, oh, I need to eat, you know, and so he didn't eat well, and then my milk supply went down, and it was just a constant battle after he was born to like keep him alive, keep him from losing weight. Like, he went below his birth weight, you know, like so it was like constant trips to the pediatrician, constant weigh-ins, constant, you know, pumping, constant battle on Formula 2 supplementing, and just this, like, you know, how do we get this kid to come up in the world, you know, like to the point where, you know, a kid at that age, you know, the doctor, pediatricians were like, well, he needs to get enough, you know, fat in his brain because, like, eating, you know, you need to drink enough, you know, milk as a baby to get enough fat, because if you don't have enough fat, then your brain can't develop correctly. I mean, there's just so many things you could do wrong with a baby. There's so many mistakes you can make. You know, you don't put them right in the bed, they can suffocate, you know, like there's so many errors you can make. And so God put us as these big people taking care of these very fragile people. And I think sometimes, like, by 5, we're like, well, they're potty trained, and like they know how to talk, and they know how to walk, and like they can carry a lunch pail, and so like that's time for them to leave. Well, a lot of cultures that's the way it is, but I just don't know, you know, I do feel like for some reason in America the adult age is 18, and there's something at 18 that clicks on a little stronger in your brain than when you're 13, 14, 15. Those younger ages, I was quite the idiot at 14. I was less of an idiot at 17, markedly so. Like, very visibly less of an idiot. And so homeschool is not the only way. There's a lot of other options. Obviously, there's Christian school. But just like, you know, when my mom dropped me off at the school where the rich kids went, thinking, like, well, this is a rich kid's school, so she's supposed to be fine, right? Well, you can't leave a kid off at a school that's like has Christian in the title and just be like, my job is done, goodbye. You know, like, you can't do that, because Christian school can sometimes be a cloak for something very dark going on. My husband's younger brother, they ended up stopped homeschooling his brother and sister, and they put him, I think, in a Christian school. And his younger brother, it was like, he was just like, I can't remember the story exactly, but I think just the hypocrisy surrounding him at that Christian school, he was like begging his parents to put him in public school. He ended up going to public school. He ended up doing just fine. Like I said, like, there's a lot of kids that do just fine in public school. And, you know, every, you know, good, all the rest was good. You know, at the church school that was part of the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church we went to in San Diego, you know, there was a lot of kind of, there was some bitterness with my friend's husband because, you know, he went to that church school there, and I guess the pastor's kid or whatever, like, he would, you know, do bad things. Like, I guess he recounted the story about how the pastor's kid would blow up seagulls with Alka-Seltzer or something. I don't know how you do such a thing like that, or what would bring you to San Diego, so there's seagulls, you know, and you know, people looked the other way because he's the pastor's kid, you know. So it's like, sometimes it's not the best thing to be in that environment, because it can kind of make your kid kind of sickened to the hypocrisy. And also, you know, if there are favorites, you know, if there's certain people, you know, maybe they're the kid of a certain administrator, or they're this person or that person, you know, that you just can't, if you respect somebody and their kid is doing something bad, sometimes it's hard to not turn a blind eye. It's hard to be like, you know, this kid, I don't care who you are, that's not okay, you can't do that. You know, so, you know, just because it says Christian doesn't mean it's okay, and doesn't mean that things maybe won't even be worse than public school. But that is definitely an option. My cousin went to a really good Christian school and absolutely loved it. So, you know, I think it was a really good, strong foundation. That was, I think it was San Diego Christian. I don't know if it's still that way, but, you know, it seemed like a really good Christian school. So there are good Christian schools and there's not so good ones, so just don't be deceived by the Christian in the title. And there are good public schools. I mean, I do feel like I've been, once again, tempted to go the public school route once we moved to New York City, because they have amazing public schools here. Like, you have to audition to get into these. And of course, if you don't make it into one of the audition schools, they have like a, you know, like, oh, there's this school over here you can go to. But I mean, in New York City, there's like, it's like performing arts. There's, you know, Bronx Technology something school, and there's Stoyevescent, I can't say all these words, these names, but there's like these really fancy schools that if your kids test high enough, they get to go to this fancy school, and the people from these fancy schools, I think like the acceptance rate at like Harvard and Yale, and it's like, oh yeah, you're good, you're in, you know. So that, you know, that's been tempting. Particularly, there's a school here, I think it's called the Kaufman School of Music. I think it's a public school, and I think you have to audition for it, and it just seems like a really cool school. So I'm not gonna lie, that's tempting. But that's my take on why we started homeschooling, why we've continued to homeschool even when there are other options. And anyway, I hope it didn't offend anybody. It probably did anyway, but thanks for listening.